Explosions, screaming civilians, hundreds of monsters pouring through the gates. Hyrule Warriors doesn't ease players into its world with slow exposition or gentle tutorials. It throws them headfirst into absolute chaos. But here's what most players never realized. That opening cave sequence wasn't just spectacle for spectacle's sake. Every element of that chaotic introduction was meticulously designed to tell a story without saying a word. And the truth behind its construction reveals a masterclass in environmental storytelling that changed Muso games forever. Think about it. Most games, especially crossover titles, start with extensive cutscenes explaining who everyone is, what's happening, and why players should care. Pages of dialogue, lengthy tutorials, gradual introductions to mechanics. Hyrule Warriors says no to all of that. Instead, the game drops players directly into the middle of a desperate battle for Hyrule Castle Town. And that choice, it's absolutely brilliant. The very first image players see isn't a peaceful kingdom or a cheerful hero setting out on adventure, it's destruction. Buildings are crumbling, citizens are fleeing in terror, and an army of monsters is laying siege to the capital itself. This immediate visual chaos accomplishes something most opening sequences fail to achieve. It makes players feel the urgency before understanding the context. And that feeling of disorientation, that moment where players think, wait, what's happening? Why are we here? What's going on? That confusion is intentional. The developers wanted that reaction because it mirrors exactly what the characters themselves are experiencing. Link, Impa, and Zelda aren't dealing with a carefully planned conflict where everyone knows their role. They're responding to a sudden, overwhelming crisis that appeared without warning. This narrative technique, starting in media res, which means in the middle of things, is rarely used in video games, especially action titles. But Hyrule Warriors commits to it completely. There's no flashback explaining how the attack started, no narrator providing helpful context, just immediate, visceral action that demands players adapt or fail. Now, let's talk about what the game shows us in those first crucial moments. The camera pans across Hyrule Castle Town, and what players see tells an entire story without a single word of dialogue. The architecture is damaged, but not destroyed. This attack is recent, happening right now. Smoke rises from fresh fires, not smoldering ruins. Debris litters the streets, showing recent destruction. These aren't the remnants of an old war. This is an active invasion. And look at the civilians. They're not battle-hardened soldiers or trained warriors. They're ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. Some flee toward the castle, seeking protection. Others huddle behind debris, paralyzed by fear. A few even run directly toward danger, presumably searching for loved ones. This environmental storytelling communicates the human cost of the conflict more effectively than any cutscene could. The enemy composition in those first moments also reveals critical information to observant players. We don't just see random monsters attacking randomly. No, the assault is organized and strategic. Bokoblins form the frontline infantry, overwhelming defenders through sheer numbers. Lizalfos act as swift strike forces, flanking and disrupting organized resistance. Moblins serve as heavy shock troops, breaking through defensive positions. This tactical variety demonstrates that the attacking force isn't just a mindless horde, it's a coordinated army. Someone is commanding these creatures, directing their assault with military precision. And that revelation, delivered entirely through enemy behavior and positioning, foreshadows the mastermind behind the invasion before players ever see Sia. Speaking of which, let's examine how the game introduces its central antagonist. Sia doesn't appear in a dramatic cutscene where she monologues about her plans. She doesn't gloat to the heroes or explain her motivations. Instead, players catch fleeting glimpses of her dark magic manifesting across the battlefield. Portals tear reality open, disgorging fresh waves of monsters. Purple energy crackles through the air, corrupting and empowering enemy forces. Dark rifts appear without explanation, depositing creatures from different eras into the same battlefield. These visual cues accomplish multiple narrative goals simultaneously. First, they establish Sia as a powerful and mysterious threat.
Second, they introduce the game's central concept of temporal manipulation, enemies from different Zelda timelines appearing together. Third, they create an atmosphere of supernatural dread that distinguishes this conflict from typical military sieges.
And here's something absolutely fascinating. The game trusts players to piece together these implications without explicit explanation. There's no tutorial pop-up saying, "Notice how enemies from different games are appearing together." The developers simply present the evidence and let observant players draw their own conclusions. Now, let's focus on the three main characters and how their introductions define their roles throughout the entire game. Link appears first, already in the thick of combat, his sword flashing as he cuts through enemy ranks. There's no origin story, no scene of him receiving his equipment or accepting his quest. He's simply there, fighting, protecting, fulfilling his role as hero through action rather than words. This introduction perfectly captures Link's character across the entire Zelda franchise. He doesn't need grand speeches or dramatic declarations. He sees people in danger and responds with immediate, selfless action. The opening cave doesn't need to explain who Link is because his behavior demonstrates everything players need to know. Impa's introduction is equally revealing. She's not standing safely behind defensive lines, coordinating from a distance. She's on the front lines, fighting alongside soldiers, her presence inspiring courage in those around her. When she shouts tactical commands, warriors rally and push back against the overwhelming odds. Her role as both warrior and leader is communicated through positioning and action, no exposition required. And then there's Zelda. In many Zelda games, especially earlier titles, Zelda is primarily a figure to be rescued, a symbol of the kingdom more than an active participant. But Hyrule Warriors establishes immediately that this Zelda is different. She's coordinating the defense, making strategic decisions, and preparing to engage in combat herself if necessary. Watch her animations during those opening moments. Her body language radiates authority and determination. She doesn't cower or panic, she commands. And when she looks out at the chaos engulfing her kingdom, players can see the weight of responsibility in her posture. She's not just a princess, she's a leader bearing the crushing burden of her people's survival. The dialogue during this sequence is deliberately sparse but incredibly efficient. Impa's urgent reports communicate the severity of the situation. The enemy forces are overwhelming our defenses. This single line tells players that Hyrule's military is losing, that this isn't just another skirmish, that the kingdom faces existential danger. Zelda's response is equally concise, but loaded with meaning. We must hold the keep at all costs. This isn't a suggestion or a hopeful plea. It's a command born of desperate necessity. The keep represents the last line of defense. If it falls, the kingdom falls. One sentence communicates the mission objective, the stakes, and Zelda's absolute determination. Now, let's examine the level design itself, because the cave's architecture tells its own story. The pathway from the town to the keep forms a natural funnel, forcing enemy forces into increasingly narrow corridors. This isn't accidental geography, it's intentional defensive design. Hyrule's architects built this approach specifically to create choke points, where smaller forces could hold against larger armies. And players can see evidence of previous battles throughout the environment. Scorch marks on stone walls indicate past magical attacks. Weapon fragments litter the ground. Broken swords, shattered shields, splintered spears. These details suggest that this isn't the first time Hyrule Castle has faced siege. The kingdom has weathered attacks before, and its defenses reflect hard-won lessons from those conflicts. The item and weapon placements throughout the opening area also contribute to the narrative of desperate improvisation. Players don't find neatly organized supply caches or carefully curated equipment sets. Instead, they discover hastily abandoned weapons, emergency supply crates broken open in panic, and power-ups scattered chaotically across the battlefield. This environmental storytelling communicates that Hyrule's defenders were caught off guard, that they're making do with whatever resources they can grab, that this battle isn't going according to any prepared plan. The chaos in item placement mirrors the chaos of the tactical situation.
The escalating enemy waves deserve special attention because they function as a dynamic difficulty curve and a storytelling device. The first wave consists primarily of basic bokoblins, numerous but relatively weak. Players can cut through them with satisfying efficiency, building confidence and learning basic combat mechanics. This initial success feels earned, but it's also deceptive, because the second wave introduces Lizalfos, faster, more aggressive, requiring different tactical approaches. Players who tried to use the same button-mashing strategies that worked against bokoblins suddenly find themselves taking damage, getting surrounded, struggling to maintain control. The game is teaching through escalation, adapt or die.
And then the third wave brings moblins, Aralfaros, and even more dangerous enemy types. The pressure intensifies relentlessly. Players realize with growing dread that the enemy isn't running out of forces. If anything, the assault is strengthening. This mounting pressure creates genuine tension without requiring any dialogue or cutscenes. The gameplay itself tells the story of overwhelming odds. Here's where the genius of this opening truly shines. The game is simultaneously teaching players how to play while making them feel what the characters are experiencing. Link isn't struggling to understand combat mechanics in some safe training ground. He's learning through life or death necessity, and players share that crucible experience. This fusion of tutorial and narrative is incredibly rare in video games. Most titles separate these elements, teach mechanics in safe environments, then apply them in story contexts later. Hyrule Warriors refuses this separation. From the very first moment, mechanics and narrative are inseparable. Let's talk about the audio design during this opening sequence, because the soundscape contributes massively to the chaotic atmosphere. The music isn't a gentle melody or triumphant fanfare. It's aggressive, percussive, urgent. Battle drums pound relentlessly, matching the player's heartbeat. Brass instruments blare warnings and calls to action. The composition mirrors the on-screen chaos perfectly. And beneath the music, listen to the environmental sounds. Weapons clashing, monsters roaring, citizens screaming, buildings collapsing, magical explosions erupting. All these audio elements layer together to create overwhelming sensory immersion. Players don't just see the chaos, they hear it from all directions. The voice acting during these moments also deserves recognition. Impa's barked commands carry urgency and authority. Zelda's declarations ring with determination and barely controlled fear. Even the generic soldier's shouts communicate panic and desperate courage. Every voice line reinforces the emotional stakes. Now, here's something that often goes unnoticed. The camera work during this opening sequence subtly guides player attention while maintaining the feeling of chaotic action. When important enemies appear, the camera pulls back slightly, giving players visual breathing room to assess threats. When narrative moments occur, like Sia's dark portals manifesting, the camera frames them prominently without interrupting gameplay flow. This cinematic approach to camera movement serves dual purposes. It helps players navigate the chaos more effectively, preventing total disorientation. But it also creates dramatic emphasis on key moments, ensuring players notice important story beats even while focused on combat. The pacing of the opening mission itself reflects masterful design. It starts with immediate high-intensity action, hook the player instantly. Then it provides brief moments of reduced pressure, where players can catch their breath and process what's happening. Then intensity spikes again, pushing players to their limits. This rhythm of tension and release, escalation and breathing room creates an emotionally dynamic experience. If the entire opening was non-stop maximum intensity, players would become numb to it. If it was too measured, it would lose urgency. The developers found the perfect balance. Let's examine the mission objectives themselves and how they're communicated. Unlike many games that bombard players with UI elements and explicit instructions, Hyrule Warriors keeps things elegantly simple. The objective is clear: push forward, defeat enemies, protect the keep.
No complex quest logs or multi-step instructions, just pure, focused action. This simplicity serves the narrative perfectly. In the midst of chaotic battle, complex plans are impossible. Warriors focus on immediate, actionable goals. Hold this position, defeat that commander, protect those civilians. The mission structure mirrors real battlefield decision-making. Assess, act, adapt. And notice how the game introduces failure states. If too many enemies breach the keep's defenses, if key positions fall, if important allies are defeated, these conditions create genuine stakes. Players aren't just playing for high scores, they're fighting to prevent catastrophic outcomes. The keep can fall, the battle can be lost, and that possibility makes victory meaningful. Here's where things get really interesting from a game design perspective. This opening mission functions as a complete microcosm of Hyrule Warriors' entire gameplay loop. Everything players will do throughout the 50-plus hour campaign is introduced in compressed form during this first mission. Battlefield capture mechanics? Present. Players must secure key positions while preventing enemy capture of allied zones. Commander battles? The Lizalfos captain and eventual boss encounters introduce elite enemy mechanics.
Crowd control combat? Thousands of enemies demonstrate the game's core appeal. But this comprehensive introduction never feels like a tutorial. There are no pop-up boxes explaining mechanics, no pausing for lengthy instructions, no explicit teaching moments. Players learn by doing, through immediate application in high-stakes scenarios. This approach respects player intelligence in ways that many modern games don't. It trusts that players can figure things out, that observation and experimentation are valid learning tools, that not everything needs explicit explanation. And for players who struggle initially, the game provides difficulty options without ever making them feel inadequate. Now let's discuss the psychological impact of this opening. By starting with chaos and overwhelming odds, the game creates a specific emotional baseline. When players eventually start turning the tide, when they begin capturing keeps and pushing back enemy forces, the sense of achievement is massive because they remember that initial feeling of desperate struggle. Games that start easy and gradually increase difficulty provide satisfaction through mastery, but games that start with seemingly impossible challenges and then empower players to overcome them provide satisfaction through transformation. Hyrule Warriors chose the latter approach, and it's devastatingly effective. This opening also establishes the stakes in ways that resonate throughout the entire campaign. Players have seen Hyrule Castle Town under siege, witnessed civilian suffering, experienced the desperate defense of the kingdom's heart. Every subsequent mission carries the weight of that opening image. Players aren't just completing objectives, they're preventing a return to that catastrophic scenario. The boss encounter that caps off the opening sequence deserves special attention. After fighting through waves of increasingly dangerous enemies, after pushing through seemingly endless opposition, players face a massive, formidable opponent that tests everything they've learned. This climactic confrontation provides a satisfying payoff to the mission's mounting tension. And when players finally triumph, when they beat back the initial assault and secure the keep, the sense of relief and accomplishment is extraordinary. But the game doesn't let players rest on their laurels. The victory is temporary, the threat far from eliminated. This first battle is just the beginning, and players know it. This creates narrative momentum that propels the entire campaign. Players have invested emotional energy in this fight, connected with these characters, felt the stakes viscerally. They want to see the story through to its conclusion because the opening made them care. Let's talk about how this opening influenced other Muso games and crossover titles. Before Hyrule Warriors, many Warriors-style games followed predictable formulas. They'd start with exposition-heavy scenes, gradually introduce mechanics, ease players into the experience, safe, comfortable, familiar, and often boring. Hyrule Warriors demonstrated that you could start with explosive action and trust players to keep up. You could prioritize emotional impact over methodical teaching.
You could create narrative through environmental design and enemy behavior rather than through dialogue. This approach has influenced subsequent titles in measurable ways. Fire Emblem Warriors adopted similar principles, starting with immediate combat that establishes character relationships through action rather than exposition. Persona 5 Strikers opens with the Phantom Thieves already in action, trusting players to remember who these characters are. Age of Calamity begins with the climactic battle against Calamity Ganon before flashing back, pure in media res storytelling. This shift in design philosophy represents Hyrule Warriors' lasting legacy. It proved that Muso games could be narratively sophisticated, that spectacle and substance weren't mutually exclusive, that environmental storytelling could work in action-focused contexts. But beyond its influence on other games, Hyrule Warriors' opening matters because of what it reveals about players' psychology. When developers respect player intelligence, when they trust audiences to engage actively with narratives rather than passively receiving information, something magical happens. Players become invested in ways that explicit exposition can never achieve. The opening cave works because it demands active engagement. Players must observe, interpret, adapt, and respond. They're not told the story, they experience it. And that experiential learning creates deeper, more lasting connections to the game world. Think about how memorable this opening is compared to traditional tutorial levels. How many games have you played where the first mission is just forgettable busy work, a necessary evil before the real game begins? Hyrule Warriors opening is the opposite. It's often cited as one of the most memorable parts of the entire experience.
That memorability stems from emotional impact. The chaos, the spectacle, the desperate stakes, the immediate action. All these elements combine to create a powerful first impression that resonates long after players finish the game. First impressions matter enormously in entertainment, and Hyrule Warriors absolutely nails it. This opening also perfectly captures what makes the Zelda franchise special while remaining true to Muso gameplay principles. It features recognizable iconography, Hyrule Castle, classic enemies, beloved characters, but it presents them in new contexts with different gameplay styles at unprecedented scales. It's simultaneously familiar and revolutionary. This balance between honoring source material and forging new identity defines successful crossover projects. Hyrule Warriors opening demonstrates that you don't need to choose between pleasing franchise fans and attracting new audiences. You can do both by creating experiences that respect established lore while exploring unexplored possibilities. Let's return to that central question. What is the truth about Hyrule Warriors' opening cave? The truth is that it represents one of the most sophisticated introductory sequences in action gaming history. It accomplishes more in 15 minutes than many games achieve in hours of cutscenes. It establishes setting, character, conflict, stakes, and gameplay mechanics simultaneously. It creates emotional investment through experiential rather than expository storytelling. It respects player intelligence while remaining accessible to newcomers. It balances tutorial necessity with narrative urgency. It sets tonal expectations while leaving room for surprises. Most importantly, it proves that chaos can be intentional, that confusion can be purposeful, that throwing players into the deep end can create more powerful experiences than carefully guided handholding. The opening cave isn't just a good tutorial mission, it's a bold statement about what video game storytelling can achieve. The developers could have played it safe. They could have started with Link waking up peacefully, receiving his equipment ceremonially, setting out on a clearly defined quest with explicit objectives. That's the comfortable, traditional approach. Instead, they chose to start with explosions, invasions, desperate battles against overwhelming odds, and that choice made all the difference. This opening changed how players perceive Muso games and Zelda crossovers. It elevated expectations and demonstrated untapped potential. It showed that licensed titles could be artistically ambitious, that fan service could coexist with sophisticated design, that spectacle could serve substance.
So the next time someone dismisses Hyrule Warriors as just a Zelda-skinned Muso game, remember that opening cave. Remember the environmental storytelling, the character establishment through action, the narrative communicated through chaos. Remember how much thought, care, and craft went into those opening 15 minutes. Because the truth about Hyrule Warriors' opening cave is simple. It's a masterpiece of interactive storytelling that proves great game design doesn't need to shout its sophistication. Sometimes the most powerful narratives are the ones that trust players to pay attention, to think, to feel, and to remember.